Hello and welcome everyone to the Soonicorn table roundtable for Web3. Today we're going to be talking about how India can build this new internet and win. To unpack this, we have with us Arjun Kalsy, who's the VP of Growth at Polygon, and Pandurang Nayak, who's India Head of Startup Solution Architects at Amazon Web Services. Thank you to both of you for joining us today. Really excited to discuss this. Let's kick it off with where India is in this race to build the new version of internet. While the ecosystem is fairly nascent, it's evolving at a really rapid pace, and a lot has happened in the last 18 months. So maybe, Arjun, if you can start off with how do you see the Web3 ecosystem evolving in India, and what are the changes that you're seeing in the short period of growth that's happened?
No, sure, definitely. So I think, in India, we have, again, one of the largest talent pools in the world when it comes to Web3. And I think there's a huge amount of interest.
Right.
And of course, with Polygon, for example, I would dare say that we've proven that, you can build, technology in India and something, and the kind of technology which could be amongst the best in the world. And what we're seeing is so many, venture capital funds, so many of these large Web3 funds are also now turning their eyes to India, funding more and more Indian entrepreneurs. So there's a level of, let's say, interest and acceptance that, that Indians build great technology. So I think, we're going to see a lot of interest on the Web3 side. Of course, there are some challenges.
Yeah.
With government rulings and lack of clarity, and this is global in nature. It's not specific just to India. Even the US, I would dare say, there is not a whole lot of clarity around how to deal with digital assets. But if you're able to move past that and we're able to get the right kind of regulations in place, I think India, this is like one technology after many which you've seen over the past decade or so, in which we could truly be the global leader.
Got it. Yeah. And, we'll touch upon regulations in a second. But before that, Pandurang, there's been a cooling off period sort of that's been going on in the Web3 space, but startups continue to emerge. Do you think we're closer to building scalable startups with real world use cases in Web3? Or what are you seeing in India?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Yeah, I think, a lot of times I keep saying this, that when we are looking at anything that is on the Web3 space, I get reminded of the time in the 90s, in the late 90s. 98 was when I started working, and the internet was very new in India. We were going and explaining to people why they should build websites. For example, there were different portals that were emerging, some led by large companies, some just creating out of the blue. And we saw different kinds of use cases that came up at that time, and then eventually things converged into, let's say, e-commerce, or like what we see today in terms of the various applications we use, and like the internet is pretty much a part of our lives today, right? And we're seeing the same thing with Web3, right? We are seeing various kinds of experiments, various kinds of startups that are being built. There are different people doing different kinds of things. Some of them are in the whole like collectibles and NFT kind of spaces and all that. Some of them actually are building, like Polygon, are building the infrastructure layer for others to kind of build on. And then there are many others that are actually building applications. We're seeing a lot of DeFi use cases, financial, use cases and all that. And we're also seeing enterprises use this in a way more private way, right? They're not maybe on the public blockchain, but they're looking at blockchain as a technology and seeing how they could utilize it. When you talk about the whole sort of slowdown that's happening, that's probably a sign of how things are. It was all about crypto a while ago, like a few years ago. It was all about which coin to trade and how to kind of do things with crypto. I think that's going away, which in a way I feel is personally I feel it's a good sign that that allows for other applications to kind of come in and to the real world use cases of the blockchain to kind of get settle in and mature over a period of time. So we are very excited to see the amount of innovation that's happening in this space, and there's definitely something that's kind of coming out of this, right? So and we're still in the early days in some ways. It may take another couple of years, 5 years, maybe even more, to kind of get to the real world use cases and for it to be like more mass adopted by everyone.
Right. And you touched upon Web3 and it's sort of moving away from crypto. How central are cryptocurrencies or crypto to the idea of Web3? Because at the end of the day, it's about incentivizing users to participate and removing this middleman. Yeah. So if both of you can, talk about, are the two separate, or I personally think cryptocurrencies are essential to this whole new paradigm of internet. If you two can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Arjun, you want to go first or?
No, please go ahead. I'll then chime in later. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I think again, inherent thing over here is that you're asking people to do things in a decentralized way. The ownership of everything that you're doing on Web3. If you want to really build something that gets decentralized, you want people to contribute to that. And then if you want people to contribute into it, you need to incentivize them, and that's where tokens come in. And I think when I was saying that we've moved away from just being a very crypto focused thing, it was just about people tracking the price of Bitcoin and the price of Ethereum and kind of doing that. It's moved more to saying, okay, I'm willing to participate in this because I'm getting something out of it, and because I'm getting something out of it, I might give time and I might get a certain value in return. Sometimes I might give the value that I hold to kind of participate in a network, but I might get something else that I'm looking for from the network, either a service or content or a collectible or any of that, right? So it basically creates this whole trading sort of economy, and yes, because of that, it is inherently woven into the system. But I wouldn't say that like the whole building of Web3 applications and the Web3 ecosystem is completely like hinged on the price of what Bitcoin is trading at or whatever other coins are trading at, right? There could be like a very private network, and there are examples of very private sort of networks that where it's a set of people that are maybe interested in cricket and they're trading cricket NFTs and memorabilia, and they probably use a certain coin to kind of do that, and it's probably within that system. There are examples in gaming where the thing is that in gaming, most of these NFTs are actually maybe some power that you get, which makes your character get certain more powers, and you can probably fly in a world, or you can probably take it from one world into another world. So there's a lot of interoperability and those things that we're looking at also. So it's not always only about monetary value that's attached to these tokens.
Got it. Arjun, what do you think? How central are cryptocurrencies or tokens to Web3?
So there are two parts, right? So are they central to the technology? I would say no. Like you can, at the end of the day, blockchain technology allows you to create blockchains. You can create any type of blockchain. Like, for example, you could create a permission blockchain or something like that. There are other applications of Web3 technology as well. When we look at how to run, distributed systems, consensus. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're central to Web3, but of course, if you want to run a globally decentralized network, you need to create a set of incentives, which is where cryptocurrencies come into play, and it's just analogous to how centralized compute works, right? So today, if you want access to centralized compute, let's say from AWS or GCP, you pay a monthly subscription or possibly a per hour or a per minute fee, and similarly in a decentralized network, whenever you request compute from the network, you end up paying a fee, right? And this transfer of value happens both in centralized compute and in decentralized compute. So that's why I feel that to build a decentralized network globally, you would need to create some set of incentives.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel that for decentralized networks, cryptocurrencies are vital. Because otherwise you would not be able to sustain such a network, like, without having this kind of an economy around it.
Absolutely. And one thing that you touched about, moving on to the talent, it's attracted a lot of attention in India. It's become this hub where every international startup and investor wants to invest money. What kind of jobs do you think we'll see in this next iteration of internet? Will it be similar to consumer internet startups? Or will there be more specialist jobs? What do you think about that, and what kind of growth do you expect in the Web3 talent space from India in the next 5 years or so? Arjun, if you want to take that.
Sure. So I think from the type of jobs, again, right now, since it's early days, there's a huge dearth of technical talent. So I think getting people who are developers, smart contract developers, people who understand network topologies, how to run distributed systems. So there's a huge requirement for technical talent for sure. But then there's also a huge requirement for people who know how to manage communities. Like, Web3 companies inherently are distributed and decentralized, right? So how do you manage something like this? So, and essentially, the ability to be able to manage diverse and distributed communities, be able to, for example, solve for marketing, for something like this, there are several of these kind of jobs which I feel are very interesting, and typically everybody tells me that, oh, I'm not a technical person, I don't know if Web3 is for me, but you don't have to be. Like, there are equal number of opportunities and positions where a person with a non-technical background can do really well. And as far as India is concerned, I think the advantages are all there. They've always been there, right? So large talent pool, lower cost of living. So it's like, for example, one very interesting way which works really well for India is that if you had to fund, let's say, a company for 2 years, let's say for 2 years burn rate, right? In a place like US, you may need anywhere from maybe $5 to $10 million. In India, you need two. Right. So even for funds, they've realized that, wow, this is like a really cost-effective place where you can build like a world-class solution,
Right.
With literally minimum resources.
Yeah.
So I think the edge will always be there with a country like ours. I think as long as a few other external factors fall into place, and of course macroeconomic conditions continue to let's say improve over the next, let's say, 18 months. I think we're going to see we're going to see a lot of Indian startups do really well on the global stage.
Right. Pandurang, there's this number that I have that India, the crypto industry will create about 800,000 jobs by 2030. Do you think that's on point, or do you think there'll be more, there'll be less? And what kind of jobs do you think we might see?
By 2030, there'll probably be 100x more jobs than that. I don't think it's going to be 800K. It's going to be 80 million most probably.
Okay. Wow.
Right. So I think I think we need to recalculate that number.
Wild underestimation.
Wild underestimation.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't think these will be just called Web3 jobs kind of thing, right? I mean, at the end of the day, when you build companies, when you build when you build anything, you need a whole bunch of services. There's on one end, you need technical people who understand the protocols and who understand how to kind of build on this. But that we have seen that evolution happen over the years, where there was a time when people were just web developers, and then we had specialization where there were front-end developers, there were back-end developers, the people who had expertise in the cloud, and hence similarly there will be people, and all those people will still be required, right? I mean, it's not like when we start building Web3 solutions, we don't need a user experience in front of it, or we don't need to build apps on Android or iOS, or we don't need to build any analytics-based solution or machine learning-based solution, etc. All of those are just going to come together. It's more like there's nothing replacing the previous thing. It's more an evolution from the way we're doing things to a different way of building applications. And you will still need all the talent that we currently have, and you'll need specialization in some of the newer technologies and the newer protocols that are coming in. In addition to this, there will be a lot of people who need to understand how to do marketing in this world, how to kind of do legal contracts in this world. If you're building a network which is decentralized in nature, what are the kind of legal constructs? I mean, you take something like the Board Ape Yacht Club, which actually created all of this. Now they're thinking about how the community is coming together to think about, if I own a BAYC NFT, can I actually take that, and do I have the rights to use it for branding? Do I have the rights to kind of leverage it for like making t-shirts out of it and selling? Do I own it, or does somebody else own it? So there are a lot of these things that need to be understood, and of course we don't have very well defined legal frameworks and regulation around these areas, which makes it even more challenging. And so you need people who can think about these and understand these, and then advise startups on how to do this. So there's a lot of other people which are non-technical as well that come into the ecosystem. So I think that I agree with Arjun that the number seems conservative at best, and I don't think it'll just be like Web3 jobs. It'll just be all kinds of jobs that are working in this ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. Are you seeing it is it a challenge for designers, lawyers, marketing professionals who are migrating to Web3 or crypto startups? Is it a challenge of to find people who are knowledgeable in both crypto as well as are a specialist in the field? Do you think it's expanding, keeping him up in pace with the kind of growth the Web3 space is seeing in India?
Yeah, well, I mean, if the technology came, technology really got in about 10 years ago. I mean, everybody is a beginner in this in some ways, right? I mean, specialists are people who probably worked on something in the last couple of years, gained a little bit of experience, understood what happened, and then using that experience, they can transfer it to other people. And today, I think, it is still probably early days, and hence it will be a little challenging to find outside of tech, to find a lot of people in this space. And even in tech, I think, people are still learning, people are still getting it. The good part, though, is in India, I think we have a huge tech pool, youngsters who came out in the last couple of years. A lot of them inherently have learned some of the things. We just completed, just did a conference having a lot of people, and it was exciting to see so many people working on these things. And I think in some ways, the whole pandemic situation helped. I know, for example, Polygon works with a completely remote team in 200 countries or something. I've heard them mention that multiple times, that their team is spread across 200 countries. I think the whole remote working that we got used to in and the way that these technologies, anything you build on Web3 is inherently global, because you're not building it for a certain region or certain thing. It's inherently global, right? So your talent pool can also be global. You can have people across the world that are working in you, and some of the countries that have probably worked on this a little longer can probably lend their expertise over here, and India, which has a huge tech talent pool, can lend their expertise to the world.
Right. Arjun, what do you think about the non-developer crypto literate talent? Is it expanding? Is it challenging?
Definitely expanding, but not at the pace at which the industry is expanding. So there is a huge shortage of people who understand how the even at a high level, right, how the technology works, what are some of the nuances, and again, like the problem with blockchain technology is that there is equal parts information and equal parts misinformation. Right, on the internet, right? And so when you I remember the time when I started first reading about it, there was no content, right? There were blogs and possibly some information out there, and you have to quite literally go through comments on the code, etc., to really understand, oh, okay, this is what's happening. Today there's like a whole lot of content out there. Like there are lots of websites, lots of tutorials, so it's thereby a little easier to pick this up. However, there are a lot of tutorials and blogs out there which have outright wrong information. And that's I think something is what is a problem, and I think a lot of folks are also solving this. So I think the Unacademy people and even some of the largest educators of the world, a lot of colleges now have Web3 courses. So I think over a period of time this will be solved, but I think for the next maybe 4 or 5 years there's going to be a big skill shortage in the Web3 space across like roles, even technical roles. I would say
Right.
that there's not enough people who understand this really well. So that is going to be a challenge.
So I know Polygon has been hiring pretty aggressively. Do you have to go through that period where you are putting in resources just to educate your employees about the basics of this technology?
Yes, yes, we always do that. Although to be fair, now, I mean, we do not hire unless you have a basic understanding of this technology. The kind of talent applying to Polygon now is rather
Sophisticated.
extreme, I would say, in some sense, from the best colleges in the world. And I would say that you would have to have more than a basic understanding of blockchain technology if you have to have any chance of clearing even the first round. But I mean, I don't know if I'd clear any of the rounds if I applied to it. I'm pretty sure I won't. But coming back to of course, education is a huge part of what has to happen in Web3. It's not only because you need to explain this to your employees and all. It's also because the space moves so quickly.
Right.
Right. So, if you look at, so for example, we love to talk about, DeFi, NFT. Literally 3 or 4 years ago, none of this was, existed. Like nobody knew any of this. Like even when we asked, Vitalik, like what was the thing which surprised you the most? He was like NFTs. I never imagined like this would become. So, and within like 2-3 years, NFTs has captured like everybody's imagination. Like we work with Meta and Reddit, and they're some of the largest companies in the world now have started launching their NFTs, and who knows what we'll see next year, right, or the year after that. So because the space moves so quickly, right, it is super important for us to not just communicate but literally over communicate to our employees about and to our team, right, and also to our community, of all the people who are a part of the Polygon community, folks who follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, across social channels, people who are there on our Discord channels, to continuously sort of keep giving them some information or some content which helps them better understand, not just what Polygon's doing, but where the space is going,
Yeah.
And what kind of ideas are, coming to life, and what we might see in the time to come. And I think this is so important for everybody to do so that, we can take the space forward.
Right. Pandurang, anything you want to add to that before I move on to the next question?
I mean, not really. Yeah, Arjun, I think covered that really well. And yeah, it is an exciting space. And like he said, I mean, I'm sure when they started, they had to kind of, train people and tell them what they're building. I asked this to somebody who's running a startup recently to say, how do you attract talent? How do you convince people to come and build something like, which is a crazy idea and it may or may not work? Don't people worry about, is this the right place to join? And I got some really good answers there, which, people are excited about the space. They want to understand more. They want to get deeper into the space. And so a lot of technical talent knows that when they are working in a company that's creating some crazy NFTs or creating a crazy idea in the Web3 space, they're not just trying to kind of hit at a shot for success. They're also deepening their understanding about the space and getting to become experts over there. And they know that because of the way the proliferation of apps that we have today, there is going to be a demand for this talent going forward. So, I mean, people are giving anything to kind of get into the space and get expertise into the space. And it doesn't matter what the idea is; it's about becoming a specialist in that area.
Yeah, so moving on to some challenges the space faces globally. The skyrocketing growth was not missed by regulators, and everyone's taking their own step to sort of build a framework. Our finance minister has called for global cooperation to come up with laws governing crypto. What are your thoughts on the regulatory back and forth that keeps happening in India, Pandurang, if you can comment on that? And is it causing a damage, or is it like this healthy debate that goes on when any new technology comes in? What are your thoughts on that?
All right, I'll try to say as politically correct as I can. I don't blame the government entirely to say that there's absence of very clear regulation today, right? It is a very difficult space to kind of put a very clear line and say this is what you can do and this is what you cannot do, and you don't want to kind of also set the wrong sort of boundaries or the wrong sort of things, right? I mean, there are in 2 years we have seen so many different use cases, so many different ways and things, and equally so many different bad actors also in the space, right? I mean, there are companies that just came in, took away a lot of people's money, and then just vanished out in thin air. There are today a lot of people that promise airdrops and other things, and then make people click on links and take away things, right? So it is a space that needs some bit of regulatory oversight, maybe a lot of regulatory oversight in terms of to ensure to protect investors in the space, to protect people that do things, and to protect any illegal use of technology, which happens whenever there's new technology. There are always people who find creative ways to do things that are not acceptable, right? So it always needs that regulatory framework to kind of ensure those things don't happen, and we actually have better innovation and things coming out of that. But it's very hard for people to draw exact boundaries when the space is evolving so fast, and the governments were not built for those kind of things. Again, taking an analogy back to the early days of the internet, it was equally like, I mean, when did we have copyright laws on the internet evolving? It took years for copyright laws on the internet to evolve. It took years for just to kind of understand privacy and understand what we should do about privacy. And some governments are still doing it, and that's like a thing that has been there for the last 20 years, right? So that's basically where we are today, right? And that is going to take time to evolve. I understand that a lot of people would be impatient about getting more clarity and thing around this, but these things take time. And it is for all of us in the ecosystem to continuously keep educating everyone, including the government, maybe to get into that. And trust me, the government is very, very bullish about technology. The blockchain technology can solve a lot of problems for the government itself, right? But yeah, regulation is still going to be something that will take time.
Arjun, you're part of this global corporation that's, that has employees everywhere, that has customers everywhere. You mentioned Meta and Reddit. How has your experience been, being part of, or rather overseeing the growth of an organization that still falls in this largely gray area, so to say, when it comes to regulations? Is it a challenge? Is it something you guys constantly think about, or you just focused on building what you are?
So is it challenging? Yes, it is. I mean, it's not just the gray areas. We spread across time zones. Even that can be challenging, right? So it is challenging, but however, this is the nature of organization in the times to come. I think the future, like organizations of the future, are going to be distributed and in nature. So we run a distributed network. So it just makes total sense for us to run an organization like this. Now, coming to the regulations, I think one thing which I'm very happy about is to see, governments take a very proactive stance when it comes to Web3 technology. Even if we don't have like proper regulations in place right now, we know that governments are discussing this, not just in India, but across countries in the world. Some of them have already gone ahead and started with some regulation. But again, these things take time, and we've always seen that, like laws are sort of behind technology by at least like a decade in almost all cases. Like even in India, for example, just as an example, e-commerce came first, laws came later. And we saw that literally just over the last decade. So of course, laws are going to take time. They do take time because you need to see how a technology plays out to really understand all the risks. Right? You just, if for example, if you started, let's say when Bitcoin was created in 2009 and you created a law in 2010, like none of those laws would be valid today because blockchain technology by itself has moved on. So this is the reason why it takes time, right? You need to understand the technology. Technology has to become mature to the point where you can say, okay, this is the scope of this technology. Let's create like a framework which encapsulates this sort of scope and gives us a framework with which we can, adjudicate what is right or what's wrong. Same thing, just like with the internet. So I think it will take time, but again, like super happy to see governments already discussing this. I think it will happen sooner than later. We've had, conversations with several government bodies across the world.
Right.
And I think what I can say from my side is that they're very positive signs. Like and at Polygon, generally our stance is that we are in a sense pro regulation. Like we want some rules to be there, right?
Right.
Like there are a lot of people in this industry who are like, oh, no rules, nothing, like completely sort of as one might say, anti-establishment of sorts. But what we realize is that Web3 technology binds people together. It empowers people with a sense of community and direction. And I feel that for technology like this to mature, everybody has to work together. We cannot have this mindset of us against the world. So we need to work with regulators and have some form of regulation. And yes, I'm not saying that regulation would be very pro this technology. Like there might be some governments which might take a very safe approach. There might be some which might allow this technology to maybe explore facets, new facets. But altogether, like having some framework always is going to help
Yeah.
this industry. So I think the onus is upon companies like Polygon and some of the other companies in the world to engage with government bodies, to educate them, to take their questions, so that we can get to this point of global regulations quickly.
Right.
And like I said, from where I'm standing and the conversations we're having, like very positive signs. I think in a very short period of time, possibly in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll start seeing these laws evolve. And then Web3 will leapfrog even further.
Great. So, moving on to funding, there was insane amount of capital that was deployed last year globally and even in India. And in India, in fact, the first half of this year saw close to $1 billion being poured into Web3 startups, majority of which went to Polygon. But what do you think about there has been a definite slowdown in pace, but what do you think about how is the current environment really changing the way in which funds are getting deployed in Indian Web3 startups?
So I think globally, so there are two parts to your question, right? So
Yeah.
one part is about the slowdown. So of course, there's also been a slowdown in capital markets,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And what we've seen with macroeconomic conditions, with what's happening in Ukraine and so many other global factors, like what's happening in China, etc., and the US, like the bond yields are
Yeah.
pretty crazy. When you look at what's happening, the bond yield for the 2 years period versus a 10-year period is quite nearly identical, which is just crazy to me. So I think macroeconomic factors are playing out in such a way which has created a sense of slowdown in across all types of markets, capital markets and crypto markets. However, investments are still happening. And I think what has happened in the last 6 months is that a level of rationality has come into the Web3 market, as one might say, when it comes to funding, right? And this is so interesting because it's exactly the same what happened to the internet. Like there was the 90s period where companies got valuations and funding for literally no reason, right?
Yep.
And then the bubble burst, and then it sort of again brought a very clear level of rationality because people had burnt their hands now, and then they realized that okay, we need to be a lot more we need to do our due diligence. We need to look at several other factors. And I think this is what has happened in the funding space now. So actually a lot of funding is still happening. However, like, what we've seen is that due diligence has become stronger. There's a greater emphasis on the tech roadmap, on the ability, for example, to build the tech, the ability of the team to build a community. And all of these are great things, right? I mean, these are some of the things which should have always been happening.
Yeah.
However, because of the frenzy, like, all the funds, again, motivated by, I would dare say, a collective FOMO of sorts, ended up, just investing in anything which came across their desk. So I think it's good what has happened.
Right.
I think this level of rationality is required. What will happen is that projects which do not create utility are going to at some point die out, and projects, which who are able to build genuine products, who are able to demonstrate product market fit, like how you must do in any business, will continue to thrive. And so I think this period was actually really necessary to separate, as one might say, the wheat from the chaff, and also to get people to the point where now they think about Web3 protocols like a business versus like magic internet money.
Yeah.
Where strange things are happening. So I think that's what we're seeing, and we'll see more and more funds deployed. I think a lot of like if you look at the capital structures now, almost every major Web2 fund, whether it's Sequoia, Axel, or even the usual suspects, have started doing Web3 investments. We're seeing increasingly hedge funds start looking at these kind of investments. We're seeing even large corporate companies like even Unilever has a venture arm now, Flipkart has a venture arm now, and all of these people are looking at the Web3 space. Pension funds are looking at maybe taking like anywhere from 1 to 5% of their portfolios and putting that into Web3 companies. So I think this funding of this space will continue to accelerate, but will accelerate in a rational way,
Right.
with proper due diligence and thought behind products and product market fit. So
yeah. Pandurang, what are your thoughts? I believe AWS also has its venture arm, and I don't know if you're exploring Web3 investments yet, but what are your thoughts on the impact that what is the impact of the current market on the funding of protocols and Web3 startups? What's changing compared to last year?
Yeah, I don't know much about the AWS venture arm and their investment thesis, so I'll stay away from that. Yeah, there is multiple things, and Arjun, I think, touched on most of these things where we just didn't see this in Web3. We saw this across every single kind of I think even SaaS companies or anybody else that are out there. Last year was sort of just like this year. I think everybody's traveling for holidays. Last year it was like after the 2 years of like the lull because of the pandemic. I think there was just a lot of money available and it all got deployed, and then it just triggered a mass form of just everybody kind of investing on everything that came their way. But if you just take the last year out and even look at 5 or 6 years back, there were a lot of these ICOs that were ICO based companies that were just raising money either from the public or even from investors or most of these were just doing it basis a white paper. It reminded you just of the 90s where so people could just put a single static web page that said this is my idea and then start raising money, right? So it was exactly like that about 5 or 6 years ago. And today I think people understand what are the actual potential things that you could do here, and some of the things that Arjun mentioned, like can you build a community? Do you have the expertise? What kind of technology stack are you using? Everything kind of comes into play, pretty much like any other startup investment that anybody would do. They would look at whether there is traction or whether the community is accepting this, whether there's a product market fit, and I think it does have one other great advantage. The whole Web3 space does give you one added advantage, that the models of investment can also get creative, right? So there are investors who are saying, I'll invest capital, but I'll also have a right to get access to X amount of tokens if this thing takes off, right? And those kind of models are very interesting because now founders can actually not just give up equity, which is the only thing that they could raise money for. There's also inherent value they are creating within their own economics of their thing, and they could pass that value also back to investors and reduce the amount of equity that they're giving away to investors, and that makes it much more interesting, right? And then we're talking about decentralized ownership of certain things. I mean, if there is a universe that somebody is building out there and says that everybody who participates in that owns a part of it in the true decentralized way of the thing, then how do investors play into that? So there's a lot of interesting creative problems that are coming out now in the investing in this space, and I think those will evolve over the next 4 or 5 years.
Very interesting. Arjun, I'm told that in an interview you said to deliver the promise of Web3, it's imperative to nurture new talent and create a system to fast track ideas to implementation. Can you tell us more about this and what can India do better to nurture the Web3 talent?
So I think so one of the best ways of nurturing this talent, of course. So let's go step by step, right? So number one is education.
Yeah.
Right. So to a large extent, we already see some of the largest players in the world, even folks like Scalar Academy and some of the more Unacademy, and we see several of these courses on Udemy and few many of these like publicly popular platforms. So there's already like a sense that there is already a huge amount of content out there. There's a lot of content on YouTube which you can access for free. So the education part is solved. Now, so let's say you've got developers who have an idea and you need to take that to the next level, right? There is a series of steps you need to do there as well. So this is kind of where we've seen the rise of incubators and accelerators, right? So there's several Web3 accelerators, and Web3 by nature tends to be global. So which means that whatever you're building, you're actually building for the world from day zero versus how you might typically do in a Web2 startup world. So what Polygon, at least at Polygon, what we've done is that we've number one supported, a huge number of hackathons locally and globally, like, in different countries who had local hackathons, but also global hackathons. So this was, to help, help ensure that there are, prizes available for technical developers. And more importantly, there are focused problem statements which developers can work on. So instead of me coming to you and saying, like, Apurva, build a Web3 business. Now I've given you a problem statement. Okay, solve these two things. And this gives you some sort of direction. What we've also done is invested a lot into, a lot of accelerators and incubators, right? Even with, large companies like Techstars who've done that for the Web2 world. So what this accelerator allows you to do is it takes a founder who possibly has some idea of blockchain, some idea of technology, all the way through the journey of understanding, how to run maybe a tokenized business, or even if your business is not tokenized. Let's say you're running a infrastructure kind of a company, or if you're running something which is a SaaS offering to the blockchain space, let's say maybe blockchain analytics, right? It gives you a sense or understanding of the space. And most of these accelerators have impaneled funds, which by the end of the process, you get, some sort of funding or access to capital. And this sort of, enables you to take somebody from, let's say, 0 or 1 to all the way to 10. Right. And then you get your first check. And then, once you sort of start continuously sort of improving your product, building your community, you can possibly raise the next round. So I think this kind of a system where there is a level of, let's say, handholding and touch point is extremely essential to Web3, simply because it's a new space. Like, a lot of people don't know what to do. Like, how do I don't know, set up a company in Web3? What does it look like? How do I raise money on tokens? I mean, it sounds intuitive. Okay, token, but what does it mean in terms of ownership, especially to folks who are used to investing in equity structures? How does value accrual work to token versus equity? So an entrepreneur needs to understand all of these things if you have to run a successful Web3 business, and you need to understand how Web3 communities work. So this is what essentially I'm alluding to is that the kind of support structure you need to build has to be a high touch point support structure. Okay. It cannot be that, we've got $1 billion check, jaake, solution banao. Like, you cannot have that mindset. So which is why, this is the path we've chosen, which is double down on education, double down on accelerators, incubators. Luckily, because we raised a large round earlier in the year, we connected to almost every investor in the world, large and small. So we're able to sort of, get in touch with these funds, take sessions for many of their, invested companies, many of whom are Web2 companies who want to learn and ask questions about Web3. So, doubling down on education, doubling down on building the support structure, I feel is very important to take the space forward, so that there is a level of touch point, which allows people, the sort of the space and gives them, access to people who can answer questions related to, not just building businesses, but running them, scaling them. And this is kind of when you will start to see, more and more unicorns come out of the Web3 space.
Amazing. Pandurang, can you talk a little bit about how is AWS helping Web3 startups scale? How are you guys supporting these startups in India?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, globally, there is a lot of stuff that happens on AWS naturally because of the way in which cloud computing has evolved over the years. It's easy for anybody who has an idea to start by just leveraging any infrastructure capacity on demand and then start working on it, right? 25% of all Ethereum workloads in the world today run on AWS. We support multiple different protocols, I think 70 different protocols and chains kind of run on AWS today. There's also a lot of enterprise customers that are using this for private use cases, like I said. So we have a couple of products in the space. There is a QLDB or a quantum ledger database, which gives you the same write once kind of a database that a blockchain provides, as well as there is an Amazon managed blockchain offering that allows anybody to leverage these things and then build that. And there are a lot of enterprises that are building very interesting use cases on this, and keeping private blockchains that are working with them. We've got a whole bunch of customers in the enterprise worldwide. Nestle, Sony, BMW, multiple people are using it for various different use cases that we see. In India specifically, there is 2-3 different things that are happening, right? I mean, one, if you're building a Web3 organization, there are some cricket-based NFT startups that we work with. We still, for them, for us, they're still a company that is building a solution. They still need to scale. They still need to have resilience, performance. They need to have a reliable thing when their users come, and they still need to build all that experience. So a lot of the architectural problems remain the same, right? I mean, we are working with them on microservices, choosing the right database. Somebody's integrating IoT-based integrations, or we are doing those things using various things. So we're still using all the different parts of the AWS platform, and people are leveraging all of those to build these things. The underlying infrastructure might be a public or a private blockchain solution, but then there is still a lot of applications that need to be built on top of it. There is still, you need to solve for scale, you need to have the right architecture, and all of that continues to be as it is. So we're working with them pretty much like we work with any other startups. We have solution architects, we have specialists that kind of advise them, work with them, and provide things. The other area that we would say is also the like the education space, like Arjun was talking about. So we are actually working with a lot of these startups. We're getting them together. We're trying to build communities. We're trying to get them to share information with each other. We're getting them connected to investors. So there is a whole ecosystem that we are trying to kind of build so that these companies that are building on AWS, that are working in this space, have opportunities and get connected to the right people. This is again something that we do with every startup in every other space, but specifically for Web3, because the ecosystem is so new, it's harder to kind of build those connections and build those networks, and us playing sort of a central role in connecting the dots between various people in the community.
Right. Great. Just a final question, if both of you can share your thoughts on how India can establish a lead in the Web3 space, and what do we really need to do to get there? We touched upon various points. If both of you can just summarize, Arjun, if you'd like to go first.
Sure, definitely. So I think a lot of things are already on the right track. In India, like there is a huge amount of interest in Web3, lots and lots of, I can see a lot of college students as well, and school students who reach out to me over LinkedIn, telling me about the projects they're building. So I think from the talent perspective, we are very sorted. I think what's required definitely is maybe a sense of a regulatory framework, because I don't expect, any country in the world to come with the law tomorrow. Because the technology is new, it takes time for people to get to that point. But at least some sort of framework where there is not a whole lot of, let's say, saber rattling about Web3 and the consequences of sort of doing things and things like that. Like I think when students and entrepreneurs hear about these court cases and things like this, it obviously scares them off, and then we miss out on possibly on finding or building the next Polygon in India. So I think a lot of things are right. A lot of accelerators are in place. We ourselves have been working every day to ensure that more and more talent is nurtured, more and more structures are available for folks to reach out, forums, working with so many different bodies within the country and abroad as well, to ensure that the talent gets its due. But like I said, right, there has to be some sort of sense of structure around, this is like how this is going to be. This is when you will get prosecuted. But if you don't do this, then all good. And like we've seen, even the Prime Minister is very excited about blockchain technology per se. Like it's the only contentious area is really the crypto assets and its definition. And then this is contentious globally. It's not as if any government has a very clear idea. So as long as there is some sort of framework and there is some sort of indication from the government that this is how you need to think about it, and this is what's allowed and this is what's not allowed, just even that much will help the industry frog. And I think it's something very close to my heart, as even as a child, and all the way to engineering and beyond. I've always seen that when it comes to every technology, somehow we end up missing the bus, whether it was semiconductors in the 90s, whether it was the product era where, India somehow got stuck with services. Only now we're seeing, product companies come out. So I think this is one technology where we have the chance to become a true global leader, and we should not miss this bus. So I really hope that, we reach a point where it becomes easy for people in India to set up Web3 businesses.
Right. Pandurang, how do you think India can establish this lead in the Web3 space? Do we have the right ingredients?
Yeah, I think we do have the right ingredients, and we are in a world which is much better. I think, like Arjun mentioned, when we missed the semiconductor war, we didn't probably have the infrastructure that was required. When we missed some of the product thing, we didn't probably have the internet infrastructure. Data was still so expensive and everything else at that time. I think we have some of the best internet and data prices in the world today. We have talent pool that's available. The number of engineering colleges and the number of institutions that are there in India. Education is not a problem as long as we bring all of these technologies into the education system and we don't wait for it to come into the syllabus 10 years down the line, etc. We do have a thriving startup ecosystem. I think in the last few years, we have caught up with the world in terms of the startups that are coming out of here. If you look at the SaaS startups, especially, there is so many people building SaaS companies here and then selling them to the world. So we have proved that all that is possible. What we see today is a lot of people, because of the absence of clear regulation, going and setting up in Singapore and Dubai and other things, right? So we don't want that whole brain drain, or even if the brains are sitting here, the economic drain that happens of these companies going and setting up in other countries that have gone a little ahead in terms of regulation. I think if we catch up on some of that, we have all the ingredients to really make this big and become like the hub for Web3 and get talent from all over the world to actually want to come and work over here.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Arjun and Pandurang. This was such an insightful and an interesting conversation. And thank you so much once again for joining the Soonicorn Roundtable on Web3. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Purva. Thank you for having me.